You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, thanks for coming back to the show. And for reasons I think you're aware of, this is the start of a series of Mighty Blue podcasts that are going to be pared down a bit over the next 6 weeks. Dana and I are off to the UK for 3 weeks, then I'm going to be hiking the West Highland Way and Hadrian's Wall Path in Scotland. So we'll be having our regular main guest, then one of the class, maybe two of the class of 2022, all of whom I'm recording prior to leaving on the 10th. That way, you're going to be able to hear from those already on the trail and the last-minute preparations of those about to go out. When I get back from Scotland, I bring them all on to see the progress they've made. Show notes and my commentary will be shorter because I've got a lot of Hiking Radio Network episodes to front load before my departure. I think I'm going to get everything ready, but this shorter format will help me make sure that I do. So, no book reading, no thanks to all our donors, though you know I love you all, and no me rambling on about nothing to get in the way of your enjoyment. Today, we have a really interesting bloke on the show. His name is Shep Smith, or Soundscape, and as you'll hear, he has quite a secret he kept from most of his fellow hikers. He was also on a bit of an interesting mission, and I think you'll get a kick from his science experiment on the trail. Also today, after Shep, we catch up with Chuck Hayes again. He's still heading north, and with about 3 weeks under his legs since he rejoined the trail, he's in the middle of the Smokies. So, let's get on and hear from Shep Smith, or Soundscape. I think this one's going to be fascinating. It certainly opens up an aspect of the trail that I have never heard anybody talk about in any detail at all. And our guest today is Shep Smith, or Soundscape. Hey Shep, thanks for coming on the podcast.
All right, thanks Steve, good to be here.
Now, you are something of an overachiever in life, aren't you? Tell us just the Cliff Notes version of what you did for a living.
I've had an interesting professional career so far. I joined right out of college. I joined with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration as a commissioned officer, and spent 28 years there doing ocean mapping for the most part. I worked from all over the world, but mostly all over the U.S. And I finished as a rear admiral in charge of ocean mapping for the United States and the nautical charting program.
Wow. So hang on, what is ocean? Hasn't it already been mapped, the ocean, or is it constantly being mapped?
Great question. Yeah, it's constantly being mapped. We keep doing it better, but by some estimations, we're about a quarter mapped for the oceans.
Oh, really?
If you choose a sort of a reasonable level of accuracy and resolution to gauge that. In the U.S., it's a little less than half. For U.S. waters in the 200 miles off the coast. So what's the problem?
Why isn't it all done? Why isn't it all be sorted out?
Yeah, well, it's hard because most of the mapping that we think of is done by satellites, and but that's by visual and electromagnetic waves, which don't go through water. And so you can only see, you know how far you can see through water in very shallow tropical places. You can see the bottom for a little ways. But then once you get into the deeper oceans or in murky bits, you can't see it. And so it has to be done by sonar. And so you need a ship that goes back and forth and forth and maps little strips of the ocean at a time. And the shallower the water is, the narrower the strip is that you can get. And so in coastal waters, it takes an enormous effort to do.
I'm sure it does. Yeah, I'm sure it does. Have you found Atlantis yet, by the way? Are you still trying?
It's funny, when Google first published their Google Oceans, they included a lot of weird artifacts in there, including the ship tracks from the very sparse data. that was included, and loads of people jumped on that and looked at those ship tracks and thought they were the old streets of Atlantis. But really, they're just data artifacts from
How disappointing!
Data.
How disappointing! And you mentioned you retired as Rear Admiral Shepard Smith, and you've got your own Wikipedia page, which is pretty darn cool, by the way. I did cyberstalk you.
It's the beginning of it. You're not allowed to make your own, so there's waiting for somebody to fill in some of the gaps on there. But
one could be he appeared on the Mighty Blue Show. You never know.
That's right. That's right.
So you retired last April, I believe, and you went pretty much straight on out onto the trail. First, why did you even want to hike the AT? What made you want to do it?
I'd spent some time, on the trail. I'd lived in this part of the country a lot. I grew up in Maine, and then here in the Mid-Atlantic. So I'd spent some time on the trail, and I was sort of drawn to both the challenge of it, but also to the sort of physical challenge, but also the sort of transitional moment in my life, right, where I was finishing my career. Most people on the trail are in some sort of transitional period in their life, right?
Even if they don't know it, funnily enough, sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And so I wanted to, as an admiral, I had a really busy life, every minute scheduled weeks in advance. And very, there was a lot of expectations for the way I acted, and that sort of thing that was, a lot of it was an act. It was part of the role, right?
Sure.
And so that had seeped into me from having done it for so long, that I wanted to strip all that away and have an opportunity to, sort of rediscover what was there without that. And
how interesting. So you've been not playing a role, you've been that role for years.
Sure.
And you wanted to see what something different was. I mean, the listeners can't see you obviously right now. We don't record the video, but I bet you rarely appeared with a grey t-shirt underneath an open neck shirt, did
That's
you?
Right.
When you're an admiral.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
That's funny. But then I also want to ask about your motivation, which is kind of what this story is going to be about, really. So you went straight on the trail, but you wanted something specific. You wanted to do something specific, and it speaks to your trail name, obviously. Tell us what you were trying to do, what you were looking to do.
Yeah, I found I traveled all over the world, but I always found that it was easier to approach something if you had a reason to be there, a mission, right?
So getting the Katahdin wasn't enough then.
Yeah, that was certainly a mission, but a way to engage the every day. If you go into some place, you want to learn about their food or something. But so there's loads of people out there doing blogs, and there's a very fine podcast out there that covers the trail really well. I didn't really feel like I could add very much there. And so I am a scientist. And I had noticed, I'd spent a lot of time in my career trying to minimize the impact of our mapping work on the ocean, and particularly on marine mammals. And a lot of that was about sound and thinking about how sound propagates through the water, and how it affects the marine mammals and other critters in the ocean.
Sure.
It floored me that we didn't think about that at all on land. And we had, we're very noisy on land. The way that people interact with the world on land is very noisy, with trucks and trains and planes and jackhammers and industrial equipment and everything else. And we don't think about, in the same way, the impact of that on the birds.
Is it the same? Is it the same? Interestingly, and I'm just talking off the top of my head. Is it the same as it is underwater?
Well,
in terms of what sound having an effect. Yeah.
Sound propagates further underwater. But there's a lot more. There's a lot more noise on land. Yeah. And without getting too technical about it, there are similar effects that we think about. For the sonar work with a whale, that if that whale changed its behavior as a result of our use of the sonar, it doesn't have to hurt them, right? But if they change their behavior, then we have affected the way that they live.
Yes.
But on the similarity on land is if we have a big noisy road, say, is it changing the behavior of the birds in the vicinity of that road? And so there's some really interesting research that really points at that if the birds can't reproduce or communicate with each other in a noisy environment, they will avoid that. Now, and so so maybe there won't be birds with these types of birds within a half mile of a road. But those birds are part of an ecosystem that the berries on the bushes rely on the birds to propagate the plants. And so you will see changes in the ecosystem near noisy things because of these indirect effects of the way it affects the birds.
I remember on that subject. I remember years ago watching a documentary in the UK. They built this circular road around London called the M25. It was a motorway or an interstate, as we call it over here, and they were studying the animal life that lived right on the edge of the motorway, and how close they get in these films. God knows how they do it. But they were seeing how these animals changed, their environment had changed, so they changed with the environment over a period of 20 or 30 years. It was quite remarkable to see how quick they evolved, in fact, in many ways. And there was thriving wildlife all the way around this loop of London. It was incredible to watch. And when you just said that about the noise, it took me back to both my hikes, going across the Susquehanna River, coming out of Duncannon. Yeah. The noise there, and having been in the woods for a long time, I remember I was kind of almost ducking down there. The noise was intense. Did you find that as well? I'm sure you must have.
I remember that. I remember that distinctly, and in fact, when you're crossing that bridge, you're crossing on the interstate. It's like they built a little pedestrian lane on the side of the interstate. So it's a long period where you're right with the interstate. But as you leave Duncannon, I don't know whether you remember this, going north, you go up those switchbacks, and then you go up onto the ridge. Yep. But the noise goes from that interstate, follows you all the way up to that ridge, and then as soon as you hit the crest of that ridge and go behind it, it drops off. So there's this sort of bowl effect of it, of the sound. And I actually have a lot of recordings in that area because I wanted to sort of study how the sound dropped away when you went further away. And that seemed to me that it wasn't dropping very fast there as a function of the distance because of that effect of the bowl holding the noise in. Well,
we are actually going to come back to the sounds in a minute, but I want to talk about the hike as well. But just before we get onto that, I guess your background probably gave you the motivation to do this, but did it give you some unique insights into how to go about it as well?
I think I was doing ocean mapping, so it was geographically based information. Sure. And so I went into this immediately thinking, how can I map the sound on the trail? And you could take a recording, but how do you map a recording? Well, you can click on it and listen to it, but that won't give you a sense of how it changes over space or time. And so I added into my procedure a statistical analysis of the sound itself, which tells you how loud it is, for instance. Right. And then now that's a mappable value. If it's 60 decibels. Is louder than 50, right? And so you can map that out, and the colors of the dots along the trail will show you where it's louder and where it's quieter. Yeah. And so it was that sort of a vision that I had when I started to design how to approach this problem.
Interesting. That's really fascinating. But so we're going to come back to the sounds. I actually want to talk about your hike now.
Okay.
You were a flip-flopper. Was that bound by the fact that you'd retired at a certain period of time and you thought that a flip-flop was the only way you could do this?
Well, there were really two things. I had really planned to flip-flop from the beginning because these were COVID times, and the ATC was trying to figure out how to get people on the trail with as safely as possible for them and for the trail towns and everything. And they recognized that having everybody go together, starting all at the same time, would be a bit of more of a problem. And so they were encouraging people to flip flop.
Yes, absolutely.
That spoke to me. I was trying to figure out how to be responsible here. But also if you do it right, the weather is great the whole way, where you can wear the same getup the whole way. and it's basically spring and spring and spring and spring and spring and spring until it's early fall, and then you just follow the early fall all the way down.
You must have seen. Yes, flip-floppers must see some fantastic sights, mustn't they? As the fall leaves.
Indeed. So the flip-flop, that was always the way I planned to do it. I regret a little bit the traditional rhythm that, you hear from the way people tell the story of their experience at the hike.
Sure.
I went to all the same places. I was there a different time of year. I was never part of a big crowd, which was fine. It worked out well with my retirement.
Was that a choice, Shep, or you happy not to have had such an experience with so many people, with quite a lot of people?
Yeah, I mean, there was never. I did have shelters all to myself a few times, but it was very rare.
You and the mice, you mean? You and the mice.
Yeah, me and the mice. Yeah. But I usually didn't stay in the shelter anyway, but I'd stay in a tent nearby. But there was, but there were always enough people to be part of a community, but not enough that you had to wait in line to get water, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah, that just does happen to it sometimes. You're right, yeah. And as I understand it, and this is really so interesting to me, you deliberately didn't share that you're an admiral. Why was that?
Well, it was part of it. I wanted to be a different. It wasn't that I wanted to be a different person. I wanted to let the person that I had become come out. And there's a lot of power to that label that would kind of fix me in sort of a persona or something, that I just didn't want that to be part of it.
You must have smelt as much as everybody else. You must have been as scruffy as everybody else. So I think it's such a trail names, as you know, you've listened to the show. Trail names are fascinating to me. People become that person, don't they? You became Soundscape, I'm sure. But had they known you were an admiral, do you think they would have treated you differently?
Well, I don't know. They might have, but I didn't want to find out because I didn't want that to be my persona.
No, I met a general whose name was General. He obviously didn't mind sharing it. It was fine. So it was pretty darn cool, actually. And I know you've often heard me talk about the rhythm of a hike, and you shared some really interesting insights on your experience the other day. You talked about it's very similar to the scientific work at sea. Talk to us a bit about that.
Oh yeah, so my career when I was at sea, I spent about 10 years at sea, and the normal rhythm there is you're out for about 2 weeks, and then you come back to a port someplace. But while you're out, you have everything you left port with, and you have just the people you were there, you left port with, and you have to deal with with whatever problems you have given what you have with you. And then when you get back to port, you have all these opportunities to go into town and get a beer and get and fix all the things that are broken. And it just, the rhythm of the hike felt really similar to me. It was more like 4 or 5 days at a time, but you'd leave town with everything you had, and you had to make do with whatever you had until you got back to town and could reprovision. And so it was so, that association was so strong for me that I kept calling it going ashore. When we were talking about going to a town, I would talk about going ashore, because that was the mental construct that was so resonant for me.
You probably felt pretty comfortable then, didn't you? Because I was told very first day in 2014, you should treat it like 4 or 5 day hikes between stops in town. And it just gives you a whole different perspective on the hike, and you can treat it that way. They're like 3, 4, 5 day adventures, aren't they? And then you go into town and clean up, which is, as you say, have a beer and a burger. And did you allow the hike to unfold for you, or did you let the specific nature of your motivation kind of take over the hike? Did it become almost a scientific experiment, or did you just allow the thing to happen to you?
I don't think I changed the way I hiked because I was recording, except for, being quiet once an hour to do a recording.
Right.
And the people that I hiked with, I I trained to be quiet for while I did the recordings with me, or I just sent them ahead and waited until they were around the corner.
Or you just said, "I'm the admiral. You're going to be quiet now." There are times where you could pull that one, I'm sure.
But otherwise, I just recorded wherever I was, as long as I was on the trail. As I didn't do recordings in town and that sort of thing. But I did it, for the most part, just along the trail. And I didn't have I knew that I wanted to spend, to pivot at Katahdin in the midsummer and then probably take a few weeks off and then start again in the fall. But I really didn't have any hard deadlines, and I didn't set even an end date for myself until, a couple months from the end. And we could talk about that later. But it was very fluid. I went at the pace that I was comfortable with. I followed yours and others' advice to start off really slow and force yourself to go less than 10 miles a day for the first week or so, and let your body adjust. And then I was, I got stronger really fast.
And did you feel the benefit of that? Because I suspect being in the force, you were probably a pretty fit guy anyway.
Well, you would think, but by the end, my job was, sitting around talking to people and then going to cocktail parties and traveling and eating dinners and stuff. And
that doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, it was great, but it was, it ended up being a bit more of a sedentary lifestyle. So I had, I joked at my retirement party that I was going to be going on the Appalachian Trail to sort of melt away 28 years of the stress of my job and about as many pounds of Admiral. And so,
did you feel that happening to you? Did you find the stress went away from you when you were on the trail?
Yeah, I mean, there's little bits of different kinds of worry, but for the most part, it's just every day is so fluid. You sort of, within the general construct of getting some distance down the trail, if you want to stop and talk to somebody, or you want to have a long lunch, or you want to keep going, or whatever, you just do it, and there's no minute by minute implications to your decisions about how you use your time.
So, as this overachiever who didn't want to reveal that he was an admiral, did you like who Soundscape became?
I did. That's a good question.
Did you like that guy? Did you like that guy?
I did like that guy, and I liked the people that I liked. You and others talk about the great people on the trail and how you have this great stuff in common, and but I also really liked the friends that guy made, right? That were outside of that context of we tend to find out what each other do fairly on when we talk in social situations, and we don't do anything except hike on the trail, right? And as this, what do you do, has some implications for how much money do you have, or sort of what is how well educated are you, or how what's your sort of social rank, right? And Americans have weird ways of thinking about these things, but none of those conversations happen on the trail, really. You can tease it out a little bit. Usually you figure out if you've been talking, if you're, by the end of an evening talking to somebody at a shelter, you find out that somebody knows a lot about something really specific, right? Yes. And you think, well, maybe, why do you know so much about that? Oh, well, I was a plant manager for a chemical plant, right? Or right, something. And so it's there's a lot of cool discoveries that you can make. And so I was able to, I was an oceanographer. That was part of my persona, right? So I was a scientist. Sure. I did ocean mapping.
You're a nerd.
I was a nerd, right? So,
but you're an important nerd.
Yeah, but I didn't let on the important part.
That is so cool. So how different, and I've thought this quite often, how different was the experience for you? Because you started end of April, I think 27th of April at Harper's Ferry.
Yeah.
You had the benign seasons, you got to Katahdin on the 8th of August, and apparently you summited with Harvey Sutton.
That's right.
Harvey. Yeah. Little man.
Yeah, the little man. So the Suttons and I were back and forth in the same little group going all the way from Vermont.
So there were quite a few people then, weren't they? You'd caught up with quite a few. Well, you'd seen a number of people on the trail. There were plenty of people on the trail at that time with you, and then you went home and you started, was it about 3 weeks at home? Then you went south from Harper's Ferry on the 30th of August and you finished in Springer on the 13th of November. So how different was it going south to going north?
Well, we were, going north, I was, the fast northbounders were catching up to us and going, and
Sure.
so we were finished with northbounders. Southbound, well, there's a lot fewer southbounders, and starting in September, we were way ahead of the southbounders. And so it was really, we'd only get a few of the southbounders coming through. And so it was the trail was much emptier. We didn't have any problems, finding a bunk at a hostel or anything. Went to Woods Hole. I think I was the only one there one night at Woods Hole.
Oh, what a treat. What a treat that place is.
Yeah, it is. There's nobody in the bunkhouse at all.
Wow.
I treated myself to a nice room and
of course you did. You're an admiral.
That's right.
Damn right. So now let's turn back to sound.
Okay.
Did you find did you set yourself a target before you went, or you just wanted to hear what it sounded like? What was the target? What were you trying to find out, or were there some sort of surprises for you?
Well, it was, it's about the soundscape. So usually when people think about recording sounds of nature, they'll think about recording what a particular bird sounds like, and they're expecting that there was a process of isolating a particular sound to be able to appreciate that single sound by itself.
Sure.
I really didn't try to do that at all. I recorded what I heard where I was when I was there. As a bit of a sort of a representation of what the entire soundscape looked like. And if you could sort of, I could imagine that the whole surface of the earth has sound associated with it at any particular time.
Yes, it does. Of course, yeah.
And that was mappable. And I was doing it in a very slow and clunky way, on foot, hourly measurements. But it's a bit of a snapshot into what that looks like.
I understand that. So what did you use to record sounds? Was it the particular equipment?
So I did. I looked at a bunch of specialized equipment, and in the end, it was a little bit more complicated. Extra wires, extra things to charge, extra complexity. It turns out that the microphone in the new iPhone 12 that I had at the time was a perfectly good microphone. It was well calibrated, very consistent, easily reproducible. And so it was going to be easier to just use that. I looked at windsocks and that sort of thing. And in the end, I decided to keep it really, really simple, to not have any of that.
And what app did you use then?
So I used one called Sound
Meter.
X.
Oh, yeah. Right. Sound Meter X. Okay.
And
was
so
that good?
It's a good app. Yeah. It's designed for industrial hygienists. So these are people that do that measure noise in work environments for human safety. Right. So if this is, on a ship, the engine room is a really loud place, right? Near particular fans and other equipment are really loud. So we need to know, for instance, where you have to wear hearing protection, and where it's safe to spend time without that. And so we at one point had done, an industrial hygienist had measured the sound all over the ship. So I kind of knew a little bit about what this was about. But one of the benefits of that is that the program itself can analyze the sound. So it, not only sort of how loud it is, but how loud it is in different frequencies. Is it really loud in the low frequencies, really loud in high frequencies? And those have different effects on human hearing. So but it's also very interesting if you're looking at trying to understand the structure of the sound around you, because a highway noise from a distance is a kind of a low rumble, where the birds that are nearby are, up in the higher frequencies. And so you can actually visualize all of that through this app as well and reproduce that and be able to map out those differences, as well as the sort of bulk sound.
And you sent me 3 examples of sounds, and this is a bit of an experiment, so see how this works. We're gonna play them one by one, and and only about 8 or 10 seconds each, I think, and you can comment on them once we play them. Does that work? So here's the first one. So what was that one about, and where was that?
So that was a whippoorwill. That was I don't know whether the straight northbounders get into the whippoorwills, but
we did.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So it's one of the only it's only one of the only birds that sings at night, and so yeah, you wake up to the whippoorwills every morning. But it was particularly loud going through Pennsylvania. So that was one of the that was one of the examples where I could actually record a single bird because everything else was quiet except for the whippoorwills that were, making a big racket.
And that was in Pennsylvania.
That was in Pennsylvania, yeah.
And now these are more birds. Let's play this one.
All right, that was just a rich set of birds. This was also in Pennsylvania. Oftentimes the birds are louder in the morning, and so this was an early morning recording of a whole bunch of different birds. But it was you probably noticed that it was kind of quiet. There was lots of
yes,
and the whippoorwill was a little louder. This one was a little quieter, and that's. These are not adjusted in any way. These are the level. These are recorded at the same level.
Well, that was the interesting thing to me. So, how far were you away from the birds? Do you know, or that was just the ambient sound around you?
It was just. It was just. I was in my tent actually.
Right.
And it was. Just
does that make a difference, Shep? Sorry,
I don't think.
You.
I don't.
Wondered, does it?
I don't think the thin fabric of a tent changes the sound very much.
Certainly not with a whippoorwill.
Certainly not.
It's a nightmare. And I actually commented this when you sent me these. The third one, when I first started listening to it, I thought it sounds like a plane crash. So let's hear the third one anyway.
This is crossing a busy road. The AT crosses roads hundreds and hundreds of times. Many of them are quiet country roads. Some of them are giant highways, and this was one of those in between roads that has trucks and stuff, but was not a big divided highway. And I think this one was in New Jersey. But it was, but that's the same sound level as the previous one. So if you now imagining those birds trying to compete for sound spectrum with that road, that's the level of sound competition that you have to have. There could have been birds in that other one. They probably they probably got frustrated and went somewhere else because
that was the point. You made that to me. I couldn't really understand how one was so much louder, but you said they're at the same level. You record them at the same level, so that's interesting. So I can see, I mean, the birds are going to have to if they're communicating through sound, which I presume they are, then they're going to need to do it. They need to clear off and do it somewhere else, don't they? Really?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but you've actually these are just 3 examples, but then you've taken up the whole. Taking the whole exercise up a notch. Tell us about your map, which is fascinating.
Yeah, so there's I took all of those. So what I just explained about the different, the relative volumes of these different recordings is something that I could analyze out of it and then use that as a parameter to map, to put it on a map. So for those of you that are, familiar with, everybody knows moving maps, right? That's how most of us got our way down the trail. We could saw ourselves on the map. But, the scientific community uses what are called geographic information systems, or GIS, to map up scientific data geographically. And right. So for each one of these recording points, I recorded the position and the time, and a few notes on what I interpreted the sound to be, as well as the the analysis of the sound and the little recording, so you could listen to it again. And so I took all of those with a I used to be, back before I was an admiral, I was a smart kid once upon a time and used to be able to do all of this stuff myself. But over time, I lost some of my technical edge and I had to rely on others for this type of support. But I have a really great colleague named Weatherby Dorshaw, who runs is a great name.
Fantastic name. He should have been on the trail.
And he runs a company that does geographic analysis for environmental and social causes. So it's sort of a nonprofit. Sure. And it's called Earth Analytic. And so I knew him. I worked with him on some ocean issues over time, and I asked him whether he would, he and his outfit would like to be my partners on this. And so he was generous enough to contribute his time and expertise to taking these little sound samples, which my nephew had done some clever scripting to make it accessible into the GIS. And he brought them in, and we created this whole story map. So the basic information is mapped up, little dots all the way along the trail for each sound recording. Then there's also a little guided tour that allows you to go from some of the highlighted points, and I'm continuing to build that out. And I hope maybe you could include the link to that in the show notes for you.
I absolutely will. You know what? This has been fascinating to me. And so what's next? You're way too young not to work. You're only just 50 or something, or just over 50?
53, yeah. 53.
And you don't strike me as a slob. So what are you planning on doing next?
Well, I'm probably, I decided when I was hiking that obviously I was getting by on my retirement. I have a little pension as a result of my service.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, being an admiral, yeah, that probably helped.
And so I could get by, but as you say, I'm too young to just stop.
Of course.
My wife won't let me hike any more trails, so
that's the spirit.
No, and I gave up a lot, for while hiking.
And so did she, by the way. So did she.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So it's with family and hobbies and friends and everything else. And so I want to live a more of a balanced life than that. I wanted to do something important. There's some big challenges in the world from helping the human race adapt to climate change, and mitigate what we can. So I've picked up a position on the National Academy of Sciences Marine Board, where one of our main focuses is on how to decarbonize the maritime industry. So that's a little bit of a public policy type of a role. But I'm also talking to a few private companies about that would be leaders in this space, of how to transition from a very carbon heavy shipping and offshore science and industry to something more sustainable, but also to figure out how to change the energy infrastructure of the world, and particularly offshore wind.
So nothing too tough then.
Yeah.
No, that should keep you going for the next 20 or 30 years. Yeah. And it can't hurt them having an admiral on their board as well. So you know what, I think this is such a fascinating subject, Shep, and I'm so pleased that Stephen Brindle, one of my friends, introduced you to me. I know you met him on the trail. It's something that I've never heard of before, to be honest with you, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes, and I just wish you well, whatever you do, when you save the planet, I want you to come back on here and tell us exactly how you did it, okay?
All right. Well, we'll do, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on here. This has been a real treat. And I just want to say to you that, your podcast was a real inspiration to me in getting ready for this. I'm sure you don't remember, but I wrote to you when I hit about episode 30 in your podcast saying, I need Grizz's spreadsheet. And that was, of course, 3 years before or something. So, but you were kind enough to send it to me. And, but you and all of your guests have been such an inspiration, and I think really perpetuate some of what makes the trail so magical. So thank you for doing this.
I appreciate that. Well, okay. Well, hopefully we can speak again sometime, and you stay well and go ahead and save the world. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers then.
Bye.
Bye. Now, how about that? I would never have thought about the impact of sound upon the trail and its wildlife. I mean, I do know that singing karaoke in the Shenandoahs almost certainly cost me a few bear sightings in 2019. But Shep saying that there were probably birds in the background of that last sound, the road crossing, really brought it home to me. An admiral. What a coup. He was such a down-to-earth bloke, and really his enthusiasm for the trail was infectious, like it is with most people who go on this trail. Great guest. So now, with some of our class soon to set off, let's hear from Chuck Hayes, who started in January, at the beginning of January in fact, and had several weeks off, then came back in early February. Here's Chuck.
Hey, Mighty Blue.
Hey Chuck, how are you?
Doing well.
Good, good,
You hear me
good.
okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me good?
I can hear you great.
Right, so we'll get straight into it. So you came back on the trail, I think it was February the 10th, something like that. Where are you now?
I'm at Newfound Gap.
Okay. Oh, wow. Halfway through the Smokies. So what's that? So how have the Smokies been so far?
They've been pretty good. It's been cold and it really slows you down a lot more than I thought. You know, the steepness of everything,
Sure.
Especially Klingman's Dome.
Don't you think that's a bit of an epic walk though? When you approach Klingman's Dome, the forest is almost like, it's so dark in there, isn't it? There's a lot of moss on the floor, or maybe you haven't seen that this year.
It really is. It really reminded me a lot of like Olympic National Forest in Washington State.
Oh, right.
You know, it's almost like it just completely changed into that. It's really neat.
So where are you in your head now? Are you really back into it, or are you now in for the long haul? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. I don't think I have my trail legs yet by any stretch of the imagination, or at least I think that's probably a relative term, that's unique to the individual that's doing it. I've had some folks around me that they're incredibly impressive. And I think I know what that feels like, but I'm a ways from it. I think the Smokies once I get through with the Smokies a little bit, I think my legs and knees are going to recover, some, and just be able to stretch it out a little bit. Because I tell you, the Smokies, it will tighten you right on up, just right when you think you're good to go. You'll hit like another mountain you've got to go up, or, it may start raining really hard. And, there's some elements of that trail, where the torrential downpours, it just turns the trail into like a river, You have to like kind of walk on the sides and work it out, So it's something else.
So, and the Smokies was one of the, I guess in my mind before I went on the trail, even hearing about them back in the UK, it was kind of a mythical area. So I know when we cross Fontana Dam, you see the Smokies looming at you in the distance, don't you? How was that for you?
It really was. And I tell you what, the walk up out of NOC, oh my Lord, that's something else. It's basically like 7 miles up or something. It's maybe less than that, but it was certainly a doozy. And then Fontana, that was just really beautiful. In the Fontana Hilton, It's all that in a bag of chips. It's super nice. And then just seeing everything there, and then making your way up into the Smokies. And one thing that I thought was really neat was you could see that fire tower from down at Fontana Dam way up on the side of the mountain.
That's right, yeah.
And then about 4 hours later, you're standing right beside it. So it's amazing the ground that you cover when you're going up that way.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think where you were, and I know that. And I don't recall it first time, but certainly second time, the hike down into NOC needs to be done in decent weather, because that is pretty exposed, isn't it?
It sure is. It really is.
And how was the weather when you went down there?
It was slightly raining, and I was able to time that in such a way that I knew I needed to get down to NOC, because that night, and then I just did like a Nero there in the NOC lodge, little, not the lodge, but the little bunk rooms they've got.
Yeah, sure.
And it rained really, really hard all night long. And then the next day made my way out. It was pretty neat. And I was fortunate on that one too. I I ended up you know how the trail is. I ended up meeting someone that I didn't know him directly, but we know a lot of the same people.
How
and
interesting.
he had a greater Swiss mountain dog with him named Willow. And I walked up with them. He's actually slowed his pace a little bit for me to walk up with him, but that was just a real treat, you know, seeing a nice dog on the trail, you know, and it kind of takes your mind off the steepness of everything walking out of NOC.
Now I know you're at Newfound. Are you actually at the Gap now, or have you gone into Gatlinburg?
I am not at Gatlinburg right now. I took like a day off the trail, and then I'm going to be back out there. So I'm going to pick right back up on Newfound Gap Friday morning. I think Friday morning.
All right. Sorry. No. This. I'm now.
I'm sorry. Thursday morning.
We're recording on Wednesday. Yeah, Thursday morning. Yeah. So sorry. Where actually are you? Are you in Gatlinburg? You say or not?
Oh no, I'm not actually in Gatlinburg. I'm at my daughter's place right now.
Perfect. Oh, that's perfect. You can get a proper shower and things like that. So
absolutely. And I really needed to reduce my weight a lot. You know, it seems like, you know, as much as you do, I think I've done most all of that at about 30 pounds or a little bit more. And I messed up my box, my resupplies. So I was carrying way more food than I needed. So I took a moment to readjust my stuff, and I think I'm going to be around about 22 pounds with a full load of food, which I hope will be a lot better.
Now, remind me then, Chuck, are you having packages shipped to you, or how are you actually resupplying?
What I did on this last stint is because I have my daughters there in Johnson City, which is nearby. I actually dropped boxes off at NOC. I dropped a box off at NOC for myself before I went back to near Franklin at Deep Gap, because I had to walk back. I had to walk about 4 or 5 miles actually to get to Deep Gap. And then I did that loop. I call it a loop. It comes back around to Winding Stair.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yep. And then I did a Nero there. And then I basically did like 2 or 3 Neros. And then I punched out and then went to NOC, did a Nero, then punched out, then went to Fontana, did a Nero, and then went into the Smokies.
So your resupply, I certainly, one of the things that I did second time, I didn't do first time. My ex-wife was sending me boxes the first time, and I didn't have anybody send me boxes the second time. So I made sure I planned exactly how much I needed, so I didn't carry too much food. Do you think you're carrying too much food? Or, you know, they call it packing your fears. I literally did try to go into town with no food in my bag, maybe one Snickers bar or something, which is a bit risky. Have you considered trying that?
I'm definitely going to try that. And the answer is yes, sir. I am absolutely doing the wrong thing there, you know, because you know, it's your food. It seems like it's your food that weighs the most. And if you're carrying too much food, you're kind of negating all that other hard work that you did to try to make your pack light, you know? And I absolutely have been doing that and been giving food away and everything. But I'm going to work really hard on being hungry, because I think a lot of it too was, you know, before, you know, there's this, you know, the thing that comes with the Smokies. Everybody's worried about the Smokies, and justifiably so, because the Smokies is no small thing.
No, it's not.
But with regard to that, you know, you carry too much food, and I think I could have hedged my bets a little to the lighter side for sure. And hopefully I'll learn that lesson as I progress forward. And
that's really my next question was really, you know, you had a break, obviously, but you started very early, you had a break, now you're back into it, you're 3 weeks into it. So you're back acclimatized being into the trail. Are you learning lots of stuff, or is it kind of, you knew you'd do this, you knew this would happen, or is this stuff, does it feel all new to you still?
It doesn't feel new to me at all. I think one thing that I have to retell myself is to slow down enough so you can enjoy the trail, instead of setting these goals, you know, like I've got to go to here to go here and go here. And then, you know, you spend all morning staring at your feet because you're working really hard to try to get to that spot.
Yes.
I have to keep reminding myself to enjoy the trail along the way and stop and look at things, and, you know, maybe walk to the top of a fire tower or walk up a little blue blaze to get a view or something. You know, it's kind of a battle on that.
I remember that fire tail. I remember that fire tail,
and
I thought, when I was looking at it from the AOC, I thought, I think I'll go up there. But once I got up there, I was exhausted. I said, no, sod that. I'm not going up there at all. But there are certainly times, I think, and I certainly did this more second time than I did first time, even though I was quicker second time, funnily enough. I did take the time to stop and sit down and look at stuff when it was warm enough to do so. Sometimes it's just too darn cold and you can't, and you're still quite early. But sitting down on a rock and looking out is one of the great pleasures of being on the trail. And I strongly urge you to try to consider that every now and then, just to stop and breathe and look around you and see what on earth you're looking at.
Absolutely. I 100% concur with that. You've got to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy your walk because that's what you plan for and you're trying to do.
Sure.
So take a moment to enjoy it.
And are you hiking with people now, or you got a mini family, or are you just basically still by yourself?
I think I've had several little tramleys along the way, and there's great people that I've met. The trail is certainly becoming more populated. I think I probably spent my last alone night in a shelter.
Right.
I've looked at some of the reports, and I think people are starting at full load, for the last 3 or 4 weeks,
Sure.
and they're all behind me. So I think the bubble is going to be gigantic this year. It's just amazing the number of people. I've seen a lot of people out with me, a lot of great folks coming and going, even a couple of Sobos, that come back through, that are finishing up theirs.
Wow.
So there's lots of people out, and I fully believe that as soon as I drop back in on Newfound Gap, I'll probably be seeing at least 10 to 15 a day.
And are you enjoying seeing people now? Because I know you were quite happy with the being by yourself, but there are times it must wear on you a bit, mustn't it?
I think I really like it both ways now, and I find too that when I'm actually walking in the day, I may have people come by and stuff, but you don't really spend that much time. Of course, if it's a Sobo, I'll stop and talk to them.
Sure.
But, if it's somebody just passing you, you've probably already seen them or something.
Yeah.
But then, of course, everybody's talkative around the campsites and talkative around the shelters at night, that's always great. Everybody's just talking about their daily experience.
Yes. Well, as you know, I'm going to be heading out myself. This is going to air tomorrow, which is the 3rd or 2nd, or no, it's on Thursday. It's going to be on the 3rd of March. I want to catch up with you one more time, just to have a last report, because you're actually out on the trail. There's still only 2 of our class of 2022 are actually out on the trail now, although maybe there's another one starting now. But yeah, so I'd like to catch up with you if you can next week, so we can give people your latest progress report, and we'll take it from there. Okay.
I look forward to it. Hopefully I'm through the Smokies and maybe even getting close to Hot Springs by that point.
How about that?
That'll be awesome.
Enjoy it, man. Okay. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Mighty Blue.
Cheers, Chuck. Bye. To me, he sounds right at home, doesn't he? I mean, his daughter's home, of course, but you know what I mean. He's into it, and that rhythm is starting to hit him. And he's right. The Smokies are not to be sneezed at, but he's halfway through. As I say, I'll catch up with Chuck one more time before I leave. Then, subsequent weeks of the show will have all the other Mighty Blue class of 2022 members in their late stages of preparation. So that's it. When you hear the show next week, I'll be preparing to leave for the airport. I won't see you, but you'll hear me next week.